What if the house you were about to step into held a deadly secret? Emily Parker, a bright real estate agent, went missing after her last appointment with a seemingly normal couple, Mark and Susan Martin. It was supposed to be just another showing, until it became the most chilling case of deception, dark rituals, and betrayal. Emily's disappearance would expose a twisted truth about the Martins that no one saw coming. What really happened in that house? The answer is far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Emily Parker had always been known for her charm and professionalism, making her one of the most sought after real estate agents in the area. On the surface, everything about her life seemed perfect: successful career, a growing network, and a promising future. But behind that polished exterior, something darker was at play, and it was waiting for her in a place she had no reason to fear. The Martins, a couple that had recently moved to town, seemed just as ordinary as any of her clients, though they were slightly reclusive, which Emily thought only added to their mystery. Mark and Susan Martin had listed their home on the market and were eager to sell, offering Emily the chance to close the deal. It was a cold autumn afternoon when Emily arrived at their home. The trees around it twisted and gnarled as if mirroring the darkness within. The Martins welcomed her with cold smiles. And though the air inside the house felt unnervingly still, Emily brushed it off as just a poorly ventilated space. She admired the pristine, almost unnaturally clean decor of the house as they gave her the tour. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The lights flickered when no one was near them, and the silence was broken only by the soft creaks of the house settling. When she stepped into the basement, the air grew thick, and a metallic smell lingered, causing her stomach to churn. The Martins remained eerily quiet, their eyes following her with a hidden intensity that she didn't understand at the time. It was then, standing in the cold shadows of that basement, that Emily felt it, the unmistakable sensation that she was being watched, not by the couple, but by something much older, something far more sinister. She quickly excused herself, trying to brush off the growing sense of unease, but by the time she reached the front door, it was already too late. Mark and Susan exchanged a look, their expressions unreadable, before she stepped out into the evening, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The silence of the house seemed to stretch, and the door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed in the emptiness, as if the house itself had swallowed her whole. Emily's phone calls went unanswered, and her messages were never returned. She never made it back to the office, and soon after, her colleagues and friends began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The Martins' house, which had seemed so perfect in the light of day, was hiding a darkness that no one was prepared for. And by the time the authorities were called, Emily had already become a mere whisper, a fading memory in the sinister tale that was about to unfold. The Martins' house, nestled at the edge of town, had always given off an unsettling vibe, though no one could quite place why. It sat far from the main road, surrounded by overgrown trees that seemed to shroud it in a permanent shadow. The windows, though large, were always eerily dark, even in the middle of the day, as if the house itself was closing in on the world outside. The moment investigators stepped onto the property after Emily Parker's disappearance, they were hit by a suffocating silence, one that made their skin crawl. The air was thick with something unspoken, and every step inside felt like they were intruding on a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. There were no personal items anywhere, not a single family photo or memento of a life lived within these walls. It was as if the Martins had no past, no history, just a shell of a home designed to hide whatever lay beneath the surface. The smell of cleaning chemicals lingered, almost masking the faint, metallic scent that seemed to come from deeper within. The floorboards creaked unnaturally, like something or someone was walking behind them. When they entered the basement, the temperature dropped noticeably, a chill that made their breath visible. There, scrawled on the walls in dark, uneven lines, were strange symbols, symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as if alive in their own right. A sense of dread filled the room, thickening the air, and every instinct screamed that they were not meant to be there. The Martins had been careful to cover their tracks, but there were things no one could hide. things that lurked beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In the far corner of the basement, investigators found a makeshift altar, a disturbing collection of objects that suggested rituals far darker than any ordinary homeowners would engage in. The floor was stained, though it was unclear whether the dark marks were old or freshly made. Every object, every inch of the house, felt like it was pulling them deeper into a nightmare. As the search continued, it became clear that this wasn't just a missing person case. It was a case of something far more sinister. The Martins claimed Emily had left after the showing, but the disjointed timeline didn't add up. No one had seen her leave, and her car remained parked outside. The couple's story faltered under the scrutiny of the investigators, their eyes betraying them when asked about the basement. Every room they entered seemed to hold another layer of deception, another piece of the puzzle that suggested Emily had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. The house, once just a place for a potential sale, had transformed into a monument to darkness, and it was beginning to show its true face. As investigators left the house, the feeling that something was watching them persisted, and the distant sound of a door creaking shut echoed in their minds. They didn't know it yet, but the house had already claimed its next victim, and Emily Parker's fate was more horrifying than they could ever imagine. As investigators dug deeper into the lives of Mark and Susan Martin, they uncovered a past shrouded in mystery, deception, and chilling secrecy. The Martins weren't new to the area. They had simply changed their identities, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of the shadows they created. Their former lives were buried beneath layers of false records and abandoned towns, each new location offering them a fresh start in a new community, free from the dark history they sought to hide. The deeper the investigators probed, the more twisted the truth became. Former neighbors and colleagues began to speak out, recounting unsettling encounters with the Martins, particularly Susan, whose demeanor always seemed too calm, too perfect, as though she were playing a role. Mark, on the other hand, was often seen lingering at odd hours, disappearing into the woods behind their previous homes, returning hours later with strange, cryptic expressions, as if he had been to some place unknown. But it wasn't until they uncovered the true nature of their beliefs that the case took a horrifying turn. The Martins had once been members of a now disbanded religious group, one that had been linked to disappearances, strange rituals, and inexplicable deaths. The group, known for their obsession with spiritual transcendence and the belief in unlocking a higher plane of existence, had used ancient forbidden practices to try and transcend the mortal world. The Martins had been deeply involved in these rituals, participating in ceremonies that sought to open portals to other realms, hoping to communicate with beings beyond their comprehension. The symbols found in their basement, now confirmed to be part of this very cult's ritualistic language, were not simply random. They were an invocation, a calling, designed to summon something far darker than any human could control. As investigators pieced together the Martins' connection to the group, they realized that Emily Parker's visit wasn't just a chance encounter. It had been carefully orchestrated. The couple had been looking for someone to complete their ritual, someone with just the right energy to serve as a vessel for their twisted beliefs. Emily, with her bright, unsuspecting demeanor, had been the perfect candidate. The realization struck like a blow to the investigators' stomachs. Emily had been chosen long before she even set foot in their house. Every move she made, every word she spoke had been part of a plan, and now she was gone, lost to whatever dark forces the Martins had unleashed. The Martins' behavior had always been strange, but now it made a sickening kind of sense. Susan had been the quiet, calculating presence, manipulating Emily into trusting her, while Mark's unsettling nature had concealed the true horror lurking beneath the surface. Together, they had created the perfect illusion. A normal couple, living in a peaceful neighborhood, hiding in plain sight, masking their true motives. As the truth slowly emerged, the investigators began to understand the full scope of the Martins' madness, and it became clear that Emily's death was not just a murder. It was a sacrifice, a dark ritual that had claimed her life to fuel their twisted quest for immortality. The house, once just a property on the market, was now revealed to be the epicenter of something ancient and malevolent. The Martins had used it as a place to conduct their rituals, to feed their dark desires, and now that darkness had consumed Emily. But even as the investigators closed in on them, Mark and Susan had already vanished, slipping through the cracks of the world they had so carefully constructed. And as the house sat silent and empty, those who dared approach it whispered of the strange happenings that continued to plague the area. Lights flickering in the windows at night, shadows moving behind the curtains, and an overwhelming sense of dread that filled the air. As if the house itself had become a gateway to something far worse than anyone could comprehend. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance took a dark and twisted turn when a break finally came from an unexpected source. A former member of the cult the Martins had once belonged to. The informant, a woman named Claire, had been one of the last to leave the group before it disbanded after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Claire had witnessed things that shattered her understanding of reality. Rituals, ceremonies, and a chilling obsession with sacrificing human lives to gain power. She revealed that the Martins were never truly part of a religious group. They were the architects of their own terrifying belief system, a private cult that focused on spiritual transcendence through horrific means. According to Claire, the Martins believed that death wasn't an end, but a passage, and they had spent years perfecting the ritual that could transfer a soul from one body to another, supposedly granting eternal life. The basement, the symbols, the altar, it was all part of their plan. They had been trying to find the perfect vessel for their twisted purpose, someone whose life force was pure and untouched, someone like Emily. The chilling part was that Emily hadn't simply been killed. She had been chosen for a far darker purpose. The remains found near the fire pit on the Martins' property were inconclusive, but forensic teams soon confirmed that the blood splattered across the floor and walls of the basement was undeniably Emily's. It was then that the investigators realized the full scale of the horror they were dealing with. Emily had been sacrificed, her life force drained as part of the ritual to transfer the Martins' souls into her body. The altar in the basement, covered in strange ceremonial objects, held the key to unlocking the nightmarish truth. Hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be an ordinary house was a macabre truth. The Martins had been using the house itself to perform their dark ceremonies, the walls and floors soaked in the remnants of their previous sacrifices. They had been luring people in for years, offering them a sense of safety, only to eventually make them a part of their unholy rituals. Every inch of the house now felt alive with the residue of their twisted practices, as if the very walls had absorbed the horrors that had transpired within them. Yet, as the investigation continued, the Martins remained elusive, vanishing into thin air, as if the house had allowed them to disappear into the shadows, leaving behind no trace. The authorities were left with nothing but a house full of dark secrets and a growing sense of dread that hung over them like a thick fog. The house, once a place of potential, had become a place of terror. And those who dared venture too close to it began to report strange occurrences, flickering lights, doors creaking open on their own, the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off the malevolent energy the Martins had unleashed. The investigation stalled, but the whispers persisted. People said the Martins hadn't escaped. They had become one with the house, their souls trapped within the very walls, waiting for the next victim. The darkness that had once been contained within the house now seemed to bleed out, infecting the town with fear. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises at night, soft chanting that echoed from the property, and shadows that moved behind the windows, though the house remained abandoned. No one dared go near it, but those who did claimed to feel a presence watching them. A presence that felt ancient, waiting for the next soul to fall victim to the Martins' sickening quest for immortality. As the investigation into Emily Parker's death ground to a halt, the Martins' house stood silent, an unsettling monument to horror. The authorities, unable to find conclusive evidence of their involvement in Emily's sacrifice, were forced to close the case. But the town would never be the same again. The Martins had vanished, leaving behind only a trail of blood, darkness, and unanswered questions. Some whispered that they had been consumed by the very rituals they had performed, their souls now trapped in the house they had twisted into a sanctuary for their dark beliefs. Yet, those who lived nearby spoke of strange happenings that continued to plague the abandoned property. Lights flickering in the windows, shadows moving unnaturally behind closed curtains, and the occasional distant sound of chanting that seemed to rise from the depths of the house at night. It wasn't long before rumors spread, and those brave enough to venture near the house reported the most disturbing experiences. Visions of pale, lifeless faces appearing in the windows, as though the Martins were still watching from within, their eyes cold and empty. People said the house itself had become a living thing, feeding off the darkness the Martins had unleashed. It had become a prison, trapping the spirits of its creators and those they had sacrificed. Local legends began to form, stories of anyone who tried to enter the house being driven mad, hearing voices whispering their names, feeling invisible hands brushing against them in the dark, pulling them deeper into the nightmare. As months turned into years, the house deteriorated, its once pristine walls now sagging with decay, but the terror it held remained, alive and potent. Then, one fateful evening, a group of thrill-seeking teens dared to spend the night inside, eager to prove their bravery. They had heard the tales, the warnings, but they didn't believe. They didn't know that the house had already claimed too many souls to let go. As the night grew darker, the teens began to hear the whispers. Soft at first, like a distant murmur, but slowly growing louder, until it was all they could hear. The house seemed to come alive, doors slamming shut of their own accord, and cold gusts of wind swept through rooms with no open windows. One by one, the teens disappeared, their screams echoing through the walls. But when dawn broke, no trace of them was left behind. The police were called, but when they entered the house, they found nothing, only an oppressive darkness, thick and suffocating, clinging to every corner. The house had swallowed them whole, just as it had swallowed Emily Parker. It wasn't until they searched the basement that they made a horrifying discovery. The remnants of the altar, stained with blood and torn with age, and in the far corner, faint markings on the wall that resembled the symbols found in the Martins' original ritual. As the investigators stared at the marks, they realized the truth. The Martins had never truly left. They were still there, in the walls, in the very fabric of the house, waiting for the next sacrifice, the next soul to feed the darkness. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, feeding off the fear and pain of those who dared enter. And Emily Parker, the Martins, and the lost teens were not the final victims. No, the house was far from done. As the police retreated, the air seemed to grow colder, the whispers louder, and the lights flickered once more. The Martins' house would never be just a house. It would remain a place of horror, a place where souls were trapped and darkness thrived, a place where the living were drawn into the eternal nightmare.